We are now transitioning to our next panel on shareholder advocacy, which I will be moderating.
I've got my tea. Thanks.
Welcome to the shareholder advocacy session. My name is Rachel Cohen. I'm the Director of Research at JLens. Today we have a great panel, and we will discuss the nuances of shareholder advocacy and the role and choices of an asset owner. Earlier today, you heard my colleague, Rabbi Jacob Stiekel, mention the mitzvah of rebuke. So how is this relevant to shareholder advocacy? Shareholder advocacy is a strategy that speaks directly to this. One mitzvah, this mitzvah, speaks to this strategy, and Judaism itself obligates us to not embarrass someone, to speak softly, as we heard earlier from Rabbi Aaron Pankin, and we can do that by engaging corporate management. And if that doesn't work, then we can go to annual shareholder meetings and speak publicly. And so I love this text and how it speaks to shareholder advocacy in particular. And it's a way for investors to use their power. It's originally been ignored by companies, but now that social responsibility has taken on so much more traction, companies have dedicated substantial resources to corporate social responsibility. And the last thing I'll say before I hand it over to our panelists is that shareholders are part owners in companies, and they have the right, and some would argue, the obligation to engage. Today we have Ophir Brook and Laura Campos, and I'm delighted to welcome you, and please introduce yourselves and share your work on shareholder advocacy. Ophir, go ahead.
All righty. Pleasure to be here. Tzoraim tovim. It's the first time I've gotten to say that at a ESG Responsible Investment Conference. So as Rachel mentioned, my name is Ophir, and I am a U.S. network manager at what's called the Principles for Responsible Investment, also known as the PRI, also known as the UN PRI. We're not an official UN body, but we are supported by the UN. We're sort of birthed in support, or sort of with backing of the UN, and have two UN representatives on our board, the UNEP Finance Initiative and the UN Global Compact. And the UN PRI, the PRI is the world's largest responsible investment initiative. We have a global member base of just over 1,800 asset owners, investment managers, and service providers that collectively manage over half of the world's investment assets, around 70 trillion. And our members, some of which are in the room, JLens is a signatory to the PRI. And our members are called signatories because they sign on to a set of 6 principles that represent a framework to guide responsible investment practices. We define responsible investment as the integration of environmental, social, and governance factors into investment and ownership decisions, and this panel is going to focus on that latter part, the ownership aspect of being a PRI signatory. So principle 2 of the 6 principles, quote, "We will be active owners and incorporate ESG issues into our ownership policies and practices." Ownership here broken down into what we refer to as shareholder engagement, engaging in a two-way dialogue with companies, with investees, and voting. Voting your proxies at corporate company AGMs, annual general meetings. And so that's what we mean by responsible investment. That's what we mean by active ownership. And so the PRI was really birthed as a response to the sort of divestment screening approach to responsible investment. It represents an evolution in the understanding of what responsible investment is, and looks broadly at how to understand the investment implications of environmental, social, and governance issues, and how those can be integrated to better manage risk, enhance returns, and produce positive environmental and social outcomes. So when you think about impact, in this large asset class that is listed equities, yes, you can allocate capital towards strategies that explicitly incorporate ESG or are environmentally or socially themed, but shareholder engagement and voting is a crucial tool and opportunity that asset owners and investment managers have to exercise their position as shareholders, use their shareholder voice to actually influence the behavior of companies. So instead of tossing them out of your portfolio or shunning them, it's an opportunity to help them become better corporate citizens, more sustainable. And so I'll quickly wrap up this intro piece, but engagement can be individual or collaborative, and it can be proactive or reactive. The PRI really promotes collaborative engagement. What that means is bringing together groups of investors in our global signatory base to create a sort of unified voice and unified message when going to engage with a list of target companies. And we really feel that collaborative approach has many benefits to sort of going at it on your own, and I can get into some of that later. I also want to flag that in the PRI's world, engagement also refers to public policy engagement. Investors can do a lot when it comes to engaging policymakers and regulators to bring the voice of capital, of capital markets, to advocate for policies and regulations that ultimately support a sustainable global financial system. So we really encourage that as well. We engage with G20, with the EU, with other bodies on a range of environmental, social, and governance issues. So it's an opportunity, and that the PRI really acts as a facilitator of.
Hi, I'm Laura Campos, and I'm the Director of Corporate and Political Accountability Program at the Nathan Cummings Foundation. So the Nathan Cummings Foundation is a private family foundation. We have an endowment of approximately $450 million. It's focused on addressing climate change and inequality. And we have a new integrated framework we released about a year and a half ago that uses 4 focus areas, all of which are focused on addressing climate and inequality. And those focus areas include the corporate and political accountability portfolio, as well as a voice, creativity, and culture portfolio that has a religious traditions focus. So within the corporate and political accountability portfolio, we use grant making as well as active ownership strategies like filing shareholder proposals and voting our proxies to hold corporations accountable for the ways in which they can either help or hinder progress on climate change and inequality. The foundation itself is rooted in the Jewish tradition. Through our grant making, we seek to repair the world and pursue justice for those in our society that have the least. And in addition to our grant making, we really do seek to use all of our assets to pursue our goals, and so that's why we have chosen to be an active owner. In addition to really sort of using all of our assets to promote our goals, we also pursue shareholder activism, because for us it's really about preserving long-term shareholder value. As a foundation that's set to exist in perpetuity, we want to make sure that our investments are, the companies we invest in are doing a good job of managing environmental, social, and governance risks like climate change that they might face. We also do it to really reconcile the disconnects between some of the investments in our endowment, in our public equities portfolio, and our mission. So like you said, instead of just getting rid of a company because perhaps they're doing something that's not good for the climate, we choose usually to engage first. Sometimes we do it quietly through a letter or through an email to a company where we have a contact, and sometimes we don't do it so quietly. Sometimes we very publicly file shareholder proposals, and we show up at corporations' annual meetings, sometimes year after year, to ask them questions about issues that we think have implications not only for our mission and our values, but also for long-term shareholder value. And I will say that this morning, when I saw the slide with the different texts, number 4 really resonated with me as someone that has been doing shareholder activism work for quite a long time. I instantly thought of Rupert Murdoch, who of course heads a company we've engaged for a long time. I think there have probably been times when he's wanted to sort of shoo me away or perhaps even smack me because of the questions that I've gotten up and asked in his annual meetings. So I want to give a few examples of some of the things that we've achieved over the last 15 years using shareholder engagement as a strategy. One area we've been really active in because of our mission is climate change. We have engaged home building companies on the ways that they approach climate change. We've gotten commitments from companies over the years in that industry, both to look at reducing their greenhouse gas emissions that they associate with their operations, so their operational greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. But we've also gotten companies to commit to actually redesign their homes so that they were looking at the way that their products were responsible for emissions. And if you think about, the thousands of homes over, their expected lifetime and, efforts designed to address the emissions associated with those homes can have a real impact. We've also engaged a lot of oil companies. Our proposal asking Occidental Petroleum to look at carbon asset risk and do a scenario planning for a carbon-constrained environment got the support of 67% of shares voted this year. So of course that company is now taking that really seriously, and we think if they're looking at that and thinking about it, they're going to do a better job of managing their value in a carbon-constrained environment and also thinking about the ways in which they're responsible for our climate. I'd also say heading into 2018, one of the things that we're looking at is asking corporate entities to commit to using renewable energy. And we're using this as sort of an indirect way to push utilities to increase the mix of renewables in their generation mix. There's a lot of support for this strategy. Deloitte just found that corporate procurement of renewables is as effective as policy in driving renewables growth. So if anyone is interested, we'd love to have co-filers on that. It's a really easy lift. And then on the social justice side, we've also had a lot of success with this strategy. I think I'm probably running out of time, so I'll give one brief example, and that is a quieter engagement. It was really a behind-the-scenes email to a company asking them to prohibit advertisements online for predatory lending, and we were able to use our standing as an investor to get a conversation started with a company when one of our grantees had been asking them for more than a year to talk about this issue and really hadn't gotten much of a response. So it's been a really successful strategy for us.
I just want to flag that Occidental Petroleum vote was historic. It was the highest support for a resolution on the topic. Yeah.
Josh Ratner, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So JLens is the only organization out there conducting shareholder advocacy on behalf of Jewish communal capital, and we think that's really special. We have our $30 million pool Julie alluded to earlier that is comprised of investments from Jewish federations, community foundations, private foundations, and other Jewish institutions. And the fund is our platform for advocating in the shareholder space with 300 of the largest US public companies. So how do we decide what our advocacy priorities are? Or maybe to elevate it a little bit, how do we honor the tremendous privilege of advocating on behalf of Jewish communal capital? So we do so in three ways. First, we take seriously halachic discourse and Jewish traditional texts. As you may know by now, 50% of JLens' staff is comprised of rabbis. We think we're at the higher echelon in terms of ratio of rabbis and non-rabbis of Jewish communal institutions. We're proud of that. And we believe that our rich repository of Jewish texts provides a really deep reservoir of wisdom that we can bring to bear in terms of contemporary issues. Second, we actively seek out input from our investor network. We send out an annual survey asking people in our network to weigh in on what they think the most important issues are and where they'd like to see us take action from a Jewish values perspective, and we really honor that data. Third, we're vigilant about current events and seeking the right opportunities to engage with corporations. So we're really looking for that sweet spot where engaging with a company, with a corporation, can really make an influential or maybe even transformative impact. We focus on three broad areas: environmental issues, social issues, and Israel. And in the interest of time, I'll just sort of highlight a few of those, a few of our engagements in each of those areas, and maybe during Q&A or later during the coffee break, I'd be happy to fill in with more examples. But in terms of environmental advocacy, we engage companies as well in terms of climate risk, carbon asset risk, getting companies to be a bit more transparent about what that risk is and what they're doing about it, especially in the oil and gas sectors. We encourage companies to have more robust sustainability reporting and perhaps even more importantly, to report back on their compliance with the commitments they've already made to become more sustainable. And third, we engage companies in the sustainable agriculture space on issues such as food waste or water stewardship policies. In terms of social engagement, it's a pretty wide variety. We've spent a lot of time and effort addressing the opioid crisis, engaging with the largest manufacturers and distributors of opioids in the US to get them to be more transparent about what their policies are. We are also helpful in forming a coalition that now has over $1 trillion in assets to do this opioid work in a collective manner, sort of piggybacking on what PRI does. We believe in collaboration as a really important way to effectuate what we want to do. We work with cocoa companies to address human trafficking and child labor in the cocoa supply chain, especially in West Africa. We're engaging with social media companies in terms of online hate speech. Many of you may have read articles, ProPublica, the New York Times, about the degree to which Facebook was taking money, was actually getting money for advertisements to provide anti-Semitic or anti-Israel hate speech, especially during the presidential election. So we're engaging with them on that. And antibiotic resistance as a public health issue. We're working to address the extent to which antibiotics are being injected into animals, into livestock in a way that compromises our ability to have antibiotics when we need them in terms of human health and efficacy. Finally, in terms of Israel, we engage whenever necessary and whenever we can to combat economic warfare campaigns that target Israel, that single out Israel for opprobrium. And we encourage impact investing, sort of piggybacking on also the previous conversation, impact investing to promote peaceful coexistence and economic development.
Thank you, Josh. Our next topic is divestment versus engagement. We've already heard a little bit about engagement. Divestment is something that was a tactic that was really the only choice for quite a while. Screening out, negative screening. In my previous responsibilities, I used to do screening out almost all the time for ratings companies. That's what we did, ESG, environmental social governance. Now the tide is turning. We see much more engagement. And I'd like to ask the panelists, Ophir, Laura, and Josh, to please speak a little bit more about those two tactics.
Take a crack. It's really interesting to follow up on the BDS panel because I started a divestment campaign at UC Berkeley for fossil fuels. And you know, sure, you can applaud, but my perspective is very much shifted since my student activism days, 6 years ago, and I'd say that yeah, sure. Like I was shouting at the University of California to divest from fossil fuels, but then the CIO did something really interesting, the chief investment officer, and he hired me to work in the investment office that manages the endowment and the pension $100 billion fund of the University of California, and I spent about a year and a half there learning about the world of institutional investment. Fiduciary duty, and really the levers and the tools at the disposal of a large institutional investor. I'm genuine when I say my perspective has really shifted to a more nuanced one that advocates for a more sophisticated approach to promoting environmental and social impact as an institutional investor. And I think it's sort of a false dichotomy, divestment versus engagement. The two are interrelated. They're in relationship with one another. One can be used, when one fails. And there are sort of egregious situations where, or other reasons that engagement might not be the right tool in your toolbox, in which case divestment can very much be a powerful tool to use. On the topic of climate change, I think that investors have a lot of levers to use, from investing in solutions across asset classes to really engaging with companies to help them transition themselves to become, transition an oil company to become an energy company, transition, help lower the carbon footprint of, because it really is a transition. That is to say that we're not going to turn, the tap off on oil today. And so how can we help as investors expedite that transition? And from that perspective, it's actually a responsibility. You're a long-term investor. You've got long-term liabilities. Your pensioners are going to be retiring into a world that you want them to be able to thrive in. So how can you support that as an asset owner? Trying to think if there's anything else I want to say on that. It's also tied to mission, to identity. As an institutional investor, your programmatic work, if your foundation might be very political in nature, in which case divestment might be a tool that you choose to use more frequently. The PRI doesn't take a position one way or another. We just help inform our signatory base on the issues at hand. We publish a lot of research, and then we facilitate opportunities for collaborative shareholder engagement, as I mentioned earlier, on a range of ESG issues, from climate change to cybersecurity to corporate tax practices to human rights in the extractive sector. So it's a false dichotomy. It can be used as a powerful tool in the right circumstance, and engagement and investing in solutions are more important, in my opinion.
So the Nathan Cummings Foundation does have a screen on tobacco in its public equities portfolio, but otherwise we have not chosen to divest despite having an overarching focus on climate change. Engagement's not a new tactic or strategy. It's been around for a really long time. We passed our shareholder activities guidelines in 2002. And for us, we've generally sort of not taken the step to divest, again, even from fossil fuels, because of a number of reasons. One, we think that in the absence of a capital-constrained market environment, divestment is not necessarily going to change behavior, that you might actually have a much more impactful approach through engagement to changing a company's behavior rather than simply just walking away and selling the stock, right? You no longer have standing as an investor to engage that company and try and get them to see that perhaps managing their emissions might actually make them money, right? I totally agree. It's not a binary choice. I think that even if you do choose to divest, for instance, with respect to fossil fuel companies, if you get rid of all of the carbon underground 200 from your portfolio, there are still plenty of options for engagement on climate change, whether it's utilities or, some of the large energy users, which is what we're doing. We're planning to file at Red Hat and Expedia on renewables. So I think, even if you go the divestment route, there are always places where engagement is going to be really, really useful. Yeah, I think for me, the main thing is that there are certainly instances where divestment can be a valid option, but I think engagement is always equally valid.
Not surprisingly, we too at JLens prioritize engagement over divestment. We do believe that engagement, active investment, is the most powerful generator of impact in the financial markets. We want to be proactive rather than reactive, and we think that engagement opens up so many more avenues for us to actualize our values than does sort of the blunt instrument of divestment. We think that engagement influence can help us to influence corporate laggards, to better their practices, getting the worst offenders to go sort of from bottom of the pack, even to middle of the pack, can have a tremendous societal impact. And we think that active investment also incentivizes good actors to continue to lead the field and adopt best practices, both so that they can maintain their sort of ESG competitive advantage within their sectors, and also so that we can let them know that we're watching, and we want to make sure that they're taking their corporate social responsibility commitments seriously. We do believe that divestment has a role. We do use negative screens sparingly. When a company's actual sort of overall business area itself is anathema to Jewish values, and no amount of engagement is going to change that, then we choose not to hold that company. So examples include for-profit prisons or tobacco. We think, just to sort of summarize, Israel is illustrative of the approach we want to take, that impact investing, not divestment, is the preferred way to improve lives on the ground, to promote peace-building initiatives and cultivate civil society. Divestment can drum up press, can get lots of headlines, but it's not going to improve lives the same way that impact investing can.
Briefly, I would like to address proxy voting next. I do the back office proxy voting to support our shareholder advocacy at JLens. Could you briefly share your views on proxy voting?
Do you want to kick it off?
Sure. I mean, I think that proxy voting is often overlooked as a mechanism for changing corporate behavior. It's not something that's going to often get you in the news, right? You voted your proxies, so what? Although if you're BlackRock or Vanguard, you do. One thing I think is interesting to note is how much a change by just one or two large institutional investors, which has been pushed by their clients, repeated questions over a number of years, can result in different outcomes on shareholder proposals. And so you mentioned the historic vote at Occidental Petroleum. That was, I think it was Fran that mentioned that earlier this morning. That was a direct result of, years of work really to get Vanguard and BlackRock to support climate proposals. And so, you can see there, as well as the year before when they changed their policy with respect to proxy access, which lets investors nominate directors using the corporation's proxy, you can see the big difference that results from just one large institutional investor switching their vote. And I think it really pays for clients to go to their managers and ask them to really thoughtfully vote their proxies. It's really important.
I will second everything Laura just said, and mention that just like engagement and divestment are interrelated, whereby divestment can be seen as an escalation from engagement when engagement does not produce adequate results over time. Voting, as well as filing a shareholder proposal, can be also viewed as sort of an escalatory progression from engagement, and we saw that as Laura just mentioned with Occidental Petroleum. Fran mentioned Exxon earlier, and those were really, as has been mentioned, BlackRock, Vanguard, and other large shops that hold trillions of dollars, largely in passive portfolios, deciding that they've engaged for long enough, and it's time to really send a message to Exxon and Occidental in this case, that a 2-degree world is very possible, and at least tell us how you are preparing for that world. If that scenario is to unfold, how will it affect your business? And a lot of this work is really rooted in the materiality of these environmental and social issues. So how can these issues play out from an investment perspective, and therefore, shareholder engagement can be seen as a value protection and a value enhancing exercise. So voting, you can file, you can co-file. 2017 proxy season, which generally runs from March to June-ish, saw a record number of shareholder proposals, actually not a record number, second to 2015 by 3, of shareholder proposals on ESG issues, 430 of them. The top category for those proposals were on environmental issues, with climate change taking the chunk. The largest chunk. Political activity is a really common topic that shareholder proposals are used for, to get disclosure around political spending and lobbying expenditures, things like that. Human rights, labor, diversity, etc. I will stop there.
Chime in real quickly so we have some time for Q&A. At JLens, we do vote our proxies very carefully for the 300 companies we hold. Rachel does a lot of that heavy lifting and knows the details of that intimately. We want to make sure that we are aligning each and every one of our votes with Jewish social and environmental values. We're also extremely vigilant to vote against the growing number of shareholder proposals that single out Israel for opprobrium. That number has grown over the last 3 years from 5 to 10 and now 20 this past year. 20 different shareholder resolutions at companies specifically targeting Israel. Just to give a little bit of context, the number 2 country targeted, Myanmar, had two resolutions filed against it last year. So 20 to 2. And then I just want to follow up on a couple of things that Ophir said, both in terms of collaboration and in terms of filing. So we work to mobilize support for proposals that we have co-filed on, because we know how important coalition building is in this space, both to grow from individual organizations or SI firms who want to promote certain perspectives, to build the faith-based and SRI coalitions, and then ultimately to grow it so that more of the institutional shareholders who have real significant heft and clout will join in those campaigns as well.
Can I say one quick thing before we jump to questions?
10 seconds.
10 seconds. So I want to plug to the foundations in the room, to the asset owners. Your voice is crucial. I encourage you to join the PRI, join a network that, as small and resource-constrained asset owners, you might be thinking, well, we don't have the resources to go and engage with companies. That's what the PRI is here to do. We do all the work so that you can just plug in. We facilitate the engagement initiatives, and we also guide you on developing proxy voting policies and sort of policies around engagement, so that you can really formalize and operationalize this aspect of investment.
Thank you. We have time for one question.
Gotta do it.
Anyone? You're just so comprehensive.
Hi, I'm Jerry Pallas, the other co-executive director of the Israel Action Network. So just my question really goes to, if you could talk a little bit about what is the receptivity and the opportunities and challenges with working with non-Jewish entities in the Israel space?
Anyone want to take that question?
Not me.
I guess at least me. I think there's a lot of educational work to be done in terms of letting folks know what BDS is, what it's about, and how it's being manifest within the SRI space. I think, sort of going back to what Julie said earlier, we're not trying to find those who are real vehement in their pro-BDS efforts to use this space to their advantage. We're not going to convince them. We're not going to change them. But what we do want to do is find those who are much more in the middle and don't necessarily know about the complexities of the conflict or the complexities of how BDS is being manifest in this space, and with the best of intentions want to do what they think is good and right and just, but just don't know enough. And so because so much anti-Israel shareholder engagement is part of the overall sort of ecosystem of the SRI field, we need to do a lot of that engagement work and educational work to let them know what these resolutions are about and why they shouldn't support them.
Thank you, panelists, for all of your input. We will now have a half-an-hour break. And if you have any questions, I'm sure you can find us around.